Numerous accounts exist of how caring for animals has transformed people's lives for the better. However, the story of a despondent boy who was paired with a therapy dog exemplifies the incredible feats that these remarkable creatures are capable of achieving. This story happened back in 2015 in Huntsville, Utah in the U.S. The Howard family was a normal family, which consisted of Ben and his wife and their 3 children. They were a happy family, with the only arguments being those that normal families often have. For all intents and purposes, they were a perfect American family. Little did they know the tragedy that would strike them. The Howard family had experienced a relatively unremarkable day. The trio of youngsters had departed for school to engage in a day of education and recreation with their peers. All their parents had spent the day at their respective jobs. Eventually, the bell signaled the end of the school day, and it was time for the children to return home. As on countless previous occasions, Mrs. Howard had picked up all 3 of her children from school that day. The quartet was en route to their home, with the youngsters eagerly recounting their school day adventures to their mother and eagerly making plans for their activities once they arrived home. However, things took a drastic turn for the worse as Mrs. Howard was driving along her regular route. A car coming in the opposite direction suddenly appeared, going much faster than it was legally safe to do so. The car suddenly swerved into her lane, seemingly out of control. The mother of 3 tried desperately to get out of the way, but it was too late. Only moments later, the 2 cars collided in a fatal head-on collision. It turned out that the driver of the speeding car was only a young man himself, but in his inexperience and negligent driving, he had unintentionally taken the life of Mrs. Howard and 2 of her children. Somehow, 6-year-old Caleb managed to survive the crash. However, he wasn't so lucky to escape unscathed. The young boy suffered a number of injuries which were so severe that the child was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Upon being examined at the hospital, doctors determined that Caleb had multiple broken and fractured bones, including a broken femur, knee, and arm, along with some internal injuries. However, the injury that truly worried the doctors was in the young boy's head. The impact of a head-on collision was such a sudden stop that the tissues in the brain slammed against the forward area of the skull and back and all through his brain. Millions and millions of his cells were killed, said Ben Howard, Caleb's dad. This traumatic brain injury, otherwise known as a TBI, meant that even though the young boy's bones and body would heal, his brain injury could end up causing the child brain damage, paralysis, or even death. Despite all of these challenges, Ben was determined not to give up on his son. The first few weeks were critical for Caleb to see whether he would pull through his injuries. Thankfully, the young boy was able to overcome most of his physical injuries, which brought him out of the critical care unit. Despite this, Caleb still had a long way to go to try and regain some function in his brain. Luckily, as he was still young, his body was still growing, so he had the chance that his brain could regain some of the cells that it lost in the accident. A few weeks passed by, but sadly, it seemed as if there wasn't much improvement in Caleb's mental capacity. The young boy was unable to move on his own. He wasn't paralysis, however. The accident had caused him to lose the ability and knowledge of how to move by himself. The doctors tried everything they could to stimulate the boy's mind. They believed that if they could get Caleb's mind to focus on certain activities, then it would begin to heal itself and relearn all of the skills that it had lost. This was a technique that they had tried on multiple patients with TBIs, and it came with varying success. To begin with, the doctors would try to stimulate Caleb's mind through small activities, such as talking to him and showing him simple items that might spark his interest, but the young boy didn't respond as they would have liked. It seemed that the techniques simply weren't enough to get Caleb to start using his brain in a complicated way again. Seeing that they were running out of options, the doctors decided to try a different type of treatment, although it was one that not many people had much faith in. What was this alternative treatment method? Well, it came in the shape of a furry, 4-legged canine who had a lot of love to give. There have been many recent studies looking into the healing abilities of animals such as dogs, as they have been known to help decrease pain, stress, and anxiety, and aid recovery in people coping with a range of health problems. Along with, they often provide comfort and reassurance to people suffering from traumatic experiences, much like the situation that Caleb was going through at the time. If someone is struggling with something, dogs know how to sit there and be loving. Researcher Dr. Ann Berger explained, their attention is focused on the person all the time. So it was with this idea in mind that the doctors introduced Colonel, a golden retriever, to Caleb. Nobody knew what would happen or if the dog would even be able to help the young boy, but despite his hesitance, Caleb's father agreed to try anything to try and help his son get better. Colonel was an incredibly sweet dog, brought in to help Caleb by his amazingly kind-hearted owner, Susan, who enjoyed volunteering at the hospital to try and do what she could to help out. To begin with, the dog would simply sit by Caleb's bedside, hoping to give some comfort and warmth to the poor boy. There were a few signs of improvement in Caleb's brain activity, however, nothing truly drastic. This led to the doctors believing that they might have to think of a new method to try and stimulate the young boy's mind. But then something truly miraculous happened. The doctors began to see real improvement in Caleb's brain activity. Every time the dog would go to the hospital to visit the injured boy, Caleb would react in a very positive way. The boy simply glowed. When Colonel came to visit him, his heart rate increased and his respiratory function improved. A miracle was happening before the doctors and Ben's very eyes, and it was all thanks to the only modification in Caleb's routine. Colonel, the 6-year-old, quickly became much more awake when the dog would turn up to play. He would want to sit up and interact with the beautiful canine. As time went by, Caleb was able to develop more and more in terms of his motor senses and general all-round brain functions. Before long, the young boy began to learn how to move on his own again and how to speak. Suffice to say, it was little more than a miracle that Caleb was healing as much as he was, and it was all thanks to the persistence of Colonel and his soothing and comforting ways. Caleb's father couldn't believe the amazing thing that was happening. The man had feared that he would lose his son, but thanks to the dog's hard work and caring nature, it seemed as if the boy was going to be okay. The intelligent canine provided Caleb with solace and consolation during his low moments, and was equally enthusiastic to frolic with him when he felt more cheerful. Gradually, Caleb was able to recuperate his entire range of physical abilities and a substantial portion of his cognitive faculties. Today he lives with his father and grandmother who love him with all of their hearts. But for Caleb, there will always be a special place in his heart for Colonel for all that the amazing dog did for him. This is an extraordinary account that demonstrates how life can sometimes take unexpected turns, but as long as we persevere and have supportive individuals or animals like Colonel, nothing is impossible. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments below. I hope you liked this video. Please give us thumbs up. Consider to share it with your friends and family. Also, press the bell icon to never miss the update from our channel. Thank you.